My father is looking for a successor to his business empire. Our family was torn apart because of our father's poor choice. From childhood, I understood that our family was different from others. My father was obsessed with the idea of building his own empire, while my mother wholeheartedly supported his ambitions. We lived, breathed, and ate business. Breakfast started with discussing new strategies, lunch with analyzing mistakes, and dinner often dragged on until the wee hours due to heated debates about further business development. The atmosphere at home was permeated with a spirit of rivalry and the struggle for power. My elder brother Victor, the firstborn and my father's pride, believed he had every right to become the heir to the family empire. My sister Olga, no less ambitious than him, fiercely contested his claims. As for me, the youngest child, I watched their battle with bated breath, not daring to engage in open confrontation. Father would sometimes put us through peculiar trials, testing which one of us was worthy of taking the reins of power. These tests were sometimes absurd, but no one dared to defy him. After all, something greater than just the family business was at stake. It was a struggle for a place under the sun, for the right to be the master of one's destiny. Father built his empire through sheer willpower and tireless energy. In his youth, penniless, he decided to enter the construction business. He started from the very bottom, as an unskilled laborer on construction sites. Then as a foreman he would study specialized literature at night. Honing his professional skills, perseverance and hard work soon bore fruit. Seizing opportunity by the tail, Father founded his own construction company. From then on, his career skyrocketed. Within just 10 years, he managed to create a holding company that united dozens of construction firms across the country. The secret to my father's success lay in his bulldog tenacity and unshakable self-confidence. He never accepted defeat, and with every blow of fate, he only pushed harder toward his goal. Having gained authority in business circles, he turned our family into a semblance of a small empire with its own rules and laws. Father proudly stated that his business was a monument to iron character and willpower, and now, one of us children had to take on this baton. Who would prove worthy? That was the main question hanging in the air in our home. He founded a construction holding company specializing in the construction of residential and commercial properties across the country. Starting with a small crew of workers, he managed to build an entire empire uniting dozens of subsidiary companies. The core of the business was general contracting for the construction of multi-apartment buildings and office centers. The holdings firms performed the entire cycle of work, from design to commissioning of facilities. There were also in-house building material production facilities, concrete, brick, and metal structure plants. Over the years of intense labor, my father assembled an entire army of professionals. Engineers, foremen, and workers of various specialties. Strict discipline and high-quality standards ensured that all projects were completed on schedule. Gradually, the holding diversified its business by venturing into related industries. New divisions emerged, engaged in commercial real estate development, as well as companies providing building maintenance and residential property management services. My father's empire was expanding, strengthening, and capturing new frontiers. And in this gigantic machine, each of us children had to find our niche and fight for the right to become the heir to the vast construction empire. In childhood, everything was completely different. We grew up as a close-knit and united family, surrounded by our parents' love and care. Back then, my father was just laying the foundation for his future empire, while my mother was the keeper of the home. I remember how in the evenings we would all gather in the living room as a family. Father would recount fascinating stories from his turbulent youth, while mother would treat us to homemade pastries, and we children would listen open-mouthed to these tales. There was no bickering or rivalry, only warmth, laughter, and joy from every minute spent together. We spent summer vacations at the dacha, enjoying simple family pleasures. Victor, Olga, and I could play hide-and-seek for hours in the fragrant birch grove. Mother would call us home only when dusk began to fall. Tired but happy, we would all dine together, after which Dad would always read us bedtime stories. In those years, no one even thought about any showdowns or struggles for power. We were one family, living soul to soul. But everything changed when my father's business began to steadily grow. Wealth and success affected our parents in the most pernicious way. Material values eclipsed family values for them. Father fancied himself some kind of industrial tycoon and began dictating his rules of the game to everyone. Instead of bedtime stories in the evenings, lectures on business. Instead of the dacha, offices and construction sites, the atmosphere at home became increasingly tense. And it was during this time that an unspoken confrontation began between us siblings. Each of us thought that we were the one worthy of becoming the heir to our father's empire. Our former childhood friendship turned into jealousy and suspicion. Thus, The seeds of that very confrontation that only grew stronger and intensified with each passing year were sown in our family. Olga and I watched this with a mixture of envy and growing irritation, as if forgetting our very existence. Father focused entirely on raising the heir to his business empire from his eldest son. It was no secret to anyone that he cherished the dream of one day handing over the reins of power to Victor. Every manifestation of our father's favor was like a slap in our faces. Victor, for his part, accepted all the attention as his due. Strutting about with the arrogant air of a new Russian, he began to look down on us siblings even more. Mother could only shrug helplessly, unable to influence the situation. Father would sometimes remark, "No one but Victor is capable of keeping the family business afloat." At such moments, Olga would flare up like a match, while I inwardly shuddered at the thought that our father's beloved creation would one day fall into the hands of this arrogant turkey. The atmosphere at home became simply unbearable. Arguments, screaming, and mutual accusations became the norm. We split into two camps, fiercely opposed to each other, and father, blinded by the idea of a business dynasty, only added fuel to the fire, openly demonstrating his preferences in favor of Victor, while father increasingly favored his eldest son and groomed him as his successor. Mother openly took Olga's side, as if wishing to counter the men's club with her own female alliance. She began instilling in her daughter the idea of women's superiority in the business world. Men are crude and impulsive, she would often say. Business requires cunning, diplomacy, the ability to maneuver. These are much more feminine qualities. Olga listened intently to these speeches, nurturing confidence that she, not her brothers, should eventually inherit the family empire. For who, if not a woman, could combine strategic thinking with ease in decision-making? I remember how my mother cited successful businesswomen from the Forbes list, hinting to Olga that she could very well follow in their footsteps. And to reinforce her daughter's authority in my eyes, she praised Olga's business acumen and organizational skills. From the outside, it looked somewhat reckless, as if my mother had decided, against all odds, to push Olga as the successor to the business empire. Whenever she launched into her persuasive campaign, father would merely purse his lips, but not object. Perhaps he believed that mother's feminine whim would eventually pass. Meanwhile, Olga positively blossomed. Realizing that her mother was entirely on her side, she became even more ambitious, fervently studying financial reports and competitors' strategies. It seemed my sister had laid her whole life on the altar of her future ascent to the peak of power. Thanks to our mother, the confrontation between the siblings reached a new level. This was no longer just a family antagonism, but a clash of principles, matriarchy versus patriarchy, the feminine versus the masculine. And in this whirlpool of ambitions and internecine strife, I felt lost and unnecessary. I tried to stay out of this battle as the youngest child. I saw the absurdity of the situation into which our once close-knit family had plunged. Sometimes father and mother would try to involve me in this mad race for the right to become the heir to the family empire, but I merely nodded silently, feigning obedience. Deep down, I was disgusted by this petty squabbling over our parents' inheritance. Surely, after all his considerable labor, father had achieved nothing more than sowing enmity and hatred between us. I watched as Victor grew increasingly arrogant, strutting before our father and expecting that one fine day he would be invited to become a co-owner of the business. My sister, intoxicated by our mother's support, did nothing but study market conditions, hatching Napoleonic plans and thinking about how to maintain and multiply the family's wealth in this race of ambitions. I saw only their blind vanity and foolish conceit. Did they not understand that true happiness lies not in capital and positions, but in peace of mind and contentment? Instead of supporting and valuing each other, my brother and sister wallowed in petty strife, losing the most precious thing, the family bond. Sometimes, sinking into despondency, I thought that if I had just a quarter of their audacity and determination, I too could have set my sights on the role of heir. But I simply saw no point in it. What joy is there in sitting in a stuffy office, toiling daily for achievements and beheading subordinates? Far better to remain a free bird, unencumbered by corporate chains. My parents must have seen my detachment, but they attached no importance to it. They were so absorbed in their illusions about a family dynasty that they did not notice how I was increasingly drifting away from them and their crazy world of big money and the struggle for power. In their eyes, I was simply the youngest, spare child, of no interest to the business. It all started with yet another quarrel over some trifle, but quickly escalated into an all-out war. The brother and sister were shouting at each other, showering with streams of poisonous accusations. Victor called Olga an ambitious upstart who only dreamed of taking away everything he had earned through his hard work. In response, the sister poured a torrent of insults on her brother, accusing him of arrogance and disregard for women in business. The father, usually an impartial arbiter, this time took his son's side, which only added fuel to the fire. The mother, following her line, fiercely defended Olga, providing more and more arguments in favor of her business qualities. At the culmination of the scandal, Victor committed the unforgivable. He insulted his mother, calling her a menopausal feminist. This crossed Olga's line of patience, and she slapped her brother hard in the face. Everyone froze in shocked stupor. The father, flushed with anger, suddenly grabbed an expensive porcelain vase and hurled it towards his daughter. The mother screamed in horror, shielding Olga with her body. A whole kaleidoscope of emotions was reflected on her face, from fear to resentment and bitterness. In that second, something broke in our once monolithic family. As if on command, Victor and Olga went their separate ways, seething with rage. Father collapsed into a chair, covering his face with his hands, and mother burst into bitter tears. Seeing what they had all come to, I stood as if disconnected from reality, watching this tragic scene. The fratricidal war for power and inheritance had nearly destroyed our family from within. Everything went to dust: years of upbringing, love and respect for each other. Instead, hatred, disappointment and hatred reigned supreme. That evening I made a decision. I would not be part of this madness. Let Victor and Olga fight to the death for the right to possess the illusory empire. I would go my own way. Tired of witnessing the agony of my own family. Father had placed so much hope in Victor, grooming him to be his successor and investing all his efforts into teaching him the wisdom of business. But the more time passed, the more obvious it became that the elder son was simply not born for a great endeavor. Victor could sit for hours in the office, studying financial reports and strategic plans. However, as soon as he found himself at a business meeting or construction site, he became lost and mixed up all the threads. The most elementary decisions were enormously difficult for him, and showing determination and toughness was a feat. I remember one egregious case when Victor botched a major deal with investors due to his lack of promptness. The partners had sent a contract for approval that required some revision of the terms, but my brother became so engrossed in plans to modernize the head office that he simply forgot to study the document and make the edits on the appointed day. The investors' representatives showed up expecting to initial the final version. Imagine their astonishment when it turned out that Victor had not even touched the contract. The partners were furious, and I will never forget Father's look, a mixture of extreme disappointment and barely contained anger. He raved and ranted, threatening to deprive Victor of his inheritance. After such fiascos, it became obvious, Victor simply did not know how to think strategically and stay ahead of the curve. He was ready to remain a crown prince for life, but was absolutely not made to actually run the business. Sometimes Father would call me into his office and with a desperate look would say, "What should I do with your brother? I've invested so much effort in him, yet he can't even remember basic things. Have I made a mistake in choosing him as my successor?" In those moments, I could see it, enlightenment slowly creeping into my father's soul. He realized that his dream of having an heir worthy of continuing his life's work might remain unfulfilled. After all, Victor, for whom he had worked so hard, simply lacked the talent and wit for it. That was the beginning of my father's agonizing torment. On one hand, he stubbornly refused to let go of his fixation on Victor as the heir, but on the other hand, he witnessed firsthand his son's incompetence and helplessness in dealing with the simplest matters. I noticed how he would occasionally steal glances at me, perhaps involuntarily assessing the chances that I might one day shoulder the burden of the family empire. Despite my mother's efforts to instill respect for businesswomen, my father adamantly refused to see Olga as a potential successor to the family business. In his eyes, only men, strong, determined men capable of enduring any hardships, could lead a large empire. He considered his daughter's ambitions nothing more than folly, doomed to failure from the start. Sometimes, he would mock her plans to modernize the holding and optimize production processes with undisguised sarcasm. "My dear, this isn't child's play," he would mutter through gritted teeth. "This requires an iron will and masculine character, and you're just a name on paper, a department director." Olga would bristle at his words, but her father remained inflexible. Apparently, he still believed in patriarchal values and considered a woman's involvement in big business either absurd or destined for failure. Even when Victor disappointed him once again with his mistakes, my father wouldn't budge an inch from his position. Only in moments of anger would he let slip, "This is the kind of heir you turn out to be. Maybe I should just hand over the reins to your uncle on your mother's side." but never to Olga. His stubbornness prevented him from seriously considering her as a potential successor to the family construction business empire. He attributed all her achievements to her mother's influence and instigation. He himself, with his inherent conservatism, believed that a woman's place was to be the keeper of the hearth, not to take on the trade of gatekeeper of the business. Unfortunately, in the midst of this family struggle for power with Olga, a tragic incident occurred, forcing her to withdraw from the race for inheritance. It all happened at one of the construction sites of the holding, where Olga went for an inspection. Being quite determined, she intended to check the progress of the work and threaten fines to contractors in case of delays. However, as soon as she stepped onto the construction site, she found herself in a messy situation. Due to the negligence of the foreman, safety protocols were being violated. Workers were moving heavy slabs without following precautionary measures. Olga tried to intervene, but she was simply not heard. And in the next moment, a tragedy occurred. One of the slabs fell from the crane's gantry and nearly hit Olga, who was nearby. Her sister escaped with a leg fracture and a severe concussion. But this was just the beginning of her nightmare. It turned out that the fracture was complicated, requiring urgent surgery and lengthy recovery. Moreover, during her treatment, Olga was diagnosed with a serious early-stage cancer. Doctors were dismayed. No one expected such a sinister turn of events. After what seemed like a minor injury, the whole family was in shock and despair. The mother fell ill after hearing about her daughter's illness. The father helplessly shuttled between the hospital and the office, trying to maintain some semblance of composure. Victor, on the other hand, simply lost himself and locked himself in his office. I was the only one to step out of this crazy whirlwind of events. Unlike the others, I had already begun to distance myself from the affairs of the family empire. I was much more concerned about my sister's recovery than the endless turmoil of dividing capital and authority. At that moment, Olga, who was fiercely fighting for the position of successor, was knocked out of the game by fate itself. Prolonged treatment, rehabilitation, complications, all of this would take years. And thus, she reluctantly yielded the field to Victor, who, despite his incompetence, still remained the main heir in the eyes of their stubborn father. The situation with Victor reached a critical point during a crucial business event. For months, their father had been negotiating a multi-million-dollar contract with an influential Arab sheikh for the construction of an elite residential complex. This contract was of strategic importance, capable of significantly strengthening the holding's position in the Middle East. Their father understood that mistakes at such a level were unacceptable, and he was meticulously preparing for the decisive meeting. As his appendage and successor, he decided to take Victor with him. It was an opportunity for his brother to prove himself as a worthy heir to the family business. Needless to say, this chance was crucial in the eyes of their father, increasingly plagued by doubts. Unfortunately, even in the face of such a responsible moment, Victor managed to embarrass himself completely. To begin with, he hadn't thoroughly studied the provided materials and came to the meeting completely unaware of the project details. Considering the strict Muslim traditions of their partner, this was already a glaring lack of tact. But it didn't end there. When their father tried to diplomatically navigate the situation, Victor began to interrupt him and interject with his misplaced comments. The Arab delegation sat stone-faced, cooling off towards the deal with each passing minute. Meanwhile, Victor, as usual, was spouting nonsense, further embarrassing his father. The peak of disgrace came when, in the heat of arguments, he uttered something extremely offensive towards the sheikh himself. I still feel ashamed to repeat those words, but they amounted to a blatant mockery of the guest's traditions. The partners stood up and demonstratively left the negotiations. The contract hung by a thread in an instant, and only the incredible efforts of the father later allowed its salvage. But the cost was exorbitantly high on that day. My father's face contorted with barely contained anger. I saw how hard it was for him to attempt to maintain composure. Silently gathering his documents, he turned and left without saying a word to his brother. Everything was already crystal clear. Back in the office, my father summoned Victor and unleashed a brutal tirade in the presence of the holding's top managers. He rained down a torrent of insults and reproaches on his brother, completely losing control. It was evident, my father's patience had snapped. A grand scandal erupted, after which Victor was disgracefully sidelined from business and stripped of all prospects of ever becoming the heir to the family empire. The question of succession hung in the air, and I could only bitterly shake my head, seeing where this insane race had led us. On the day Victor was publicly humiliated and chastised by our father, something seemed to break irreparably within our family. The atmosphere became so tense. The confrontation took on truly tragic dimensions. My father paced like a wounded animal, unable to find peace, Sometimes he locked himself in his office, other times he summoned me and Olga, who was then undergoing rehabilitation after her illness, for heavy family discussions. It was clear that amidst the ruins of his old dream of a dynasty of enterprising sons, he was trying to build something new. During those days, I witnessed a remarkable transformation. My father seemed to rediscover me anew. He stared at my face for a long time, as if seeing it for the first time. His gaze held bewilderment and a whole ocean of missed opportunities. "Son, forgive me," he once said with a trembling voice, "forgive me for never really paying attention to you. All this time, I was so blinded by dreams of Victor as the heir. And you grew up on your own, without my attention." Father lowered his gaze. Unable to look me in the eye anymore, I remained silent, understanding that he was discovering something new for the first time in his life. "But now I see, my God, how blind I was. You are completely different. Not like Victor or Olga, you have a different mindset, a different attitude towards work. You've always amazed me with your entrepreneurial spirit." With a sigh, Father embraced me by the shoulders. I felt the half-forgotten warmth from childhood spreading through my body. "I have to give you credit, son. You've absorbed the best of what I tried to instill in my children, but you did it subtly, without shouting and breaking. You grasped everything on the fly, a priceless gift." I shrugged. Awkwardly, not knowing what to say. I had always been that third wheel, quietly present in the midst of this never-ending war for inheritance. Perhaps subconsciously something in me rejected this insane race. But at the same time, I absorbed my father's knowledge and wisdom. "Son, your time has come," Father solemnly declared. "I see, you are a worthy successor to our family empire. Moreover, I'm sure, only your extraordinary qualities can save it now, as it crumbles before my eyes." At that moment, I was as stunned as my father himself. Could it be that I, who had spent my whole life in the shadow of my siblings, would lead a huge business machine? I hadn't even considered it, but gradually, the realization of my new role dawned on me. I saw how this prospect brought relief to the ailing Olga and even comforted our saddened mother. Suddenly, it turned out that my appointment as the empire's successor dispelled the heavy family discord and animosity. Only Father bitterly regretted not recognizing me earlier. From that day, my new life began, a life at the helm of a rapidly growing holding, with all the accompanying worries and cares, but there was no room for madness and stubbornness that nearly destroyed our family business. I pursued success in my own, unobtrusive, and natural way, and I instilled hope in the hearts of my loved ones that the tragic conflicts were finally behind us.